Good afternoon. I want to welcome you to Building Digital Inclusion Ecosystems today with James Walker. As you can see here, we've got a bit of an agenda we're going to go through, and I first want to take some time to introduce James, and then he'll spend some time talking about his model and how he's developed it, and kind of some questions for discussion that we can discuss. So I'm Nicole Peterson. I'm a professor at UNC Charlotte and the lead of the Integrated Network for Social Sustainability. I want to thank you for joining us to hear about James and his digital inclusion ecosystem project here in Charlotte, North Carolina. As one of the leaders of the INSS, I'm very excited that we can bring you this workshop with the support of Natasha Strenchner and Christina Cromer of UNCC, who are running the technical side of the workshop. Thanks, guys. INSS is an international network of people who are interested in bringing more attention to the social aspects of sustainability, in truth, the integrated nature of sustainability. We assert that to achieve long-term ecological and economic sustainability, we need to consider the effects on the broader society. This includes thinking about how to increase access to technology, how to educate youth and others, and how to meet the other needs of people in our communities. We're thrilled that James' work addresses all of these and hope that you'll find his model as inspirational as we do. James Walker is the founder and CEO of Informative Technologies, a company based here in Charlotte that has addressed the digital divide and electronics recycling since 2014. James himself has worked as a network engineer, software support analyst, and business information systems engineer in a variety of companies. He's also been on the board of many nonprofits, so he comes with a background that melds both technology and nonprofits. He and others have developed software that allows older computers to be revived. He works with high school students and others to revive them, bringing both affordable technology and technological skills to communities. Given their success with this model, Informative Technologies was voted as the leading social enterprise concept of the Fall 2015 Charlotte Discovery Forum competition. And now, without further ado, I'll let James tell you more about his inspirational and successful model in more detail. James?
Thank you so much, Dr. Peterson. So I truly appreciate both Dr. Nicole Peterson as well as the UNC Charlotte community for welcoming me to be able to have a webinar about something that can be done at any university or even any community center to advance social sustainability. In the course of the next hour.
Your slides.
Thank you. Oh, this is it. I just wanted to point out the agenda. Thank you very much. We're going to look at about 5-6 key areas of what we do here. Hopefully you saw the video that we had shared from the roundtable discussion a few weeks ago. But if you haven't seen it, I'll walk through what the model is that I do, what social entrepreneurship is, which is the model that I operate my startup in. We'll look at digital inclusion as a social issue, something that is a ferment for further research and study, as well as for greater application of the work that many scholars are doing in terms of applied scholarship and making an impact also on the local community. Not only reaching out to students who are in need, but also encouraging students who are from those backgrounds to use academia as a way to empower themselves and go back to their own communities. We're going to also look at a vehicle for creating pilot programs here on UNC Charlotte's campus, perhaps also with the University of Baltimore and other participants in the INSS community, to make something that is essentially a circular economy for unused technology that's on campus, both owned by the campus or the state, as well as owned by faculty, staff, and students. And I want to, of course, open up the idea of engaged scholarship ideas, opportunities for case studies and pilots in other cities, and of course field questions, comments, and criticisms. So with that background, I wanted to walk through what is it that I'm interested in doing here and what really brought me to the table. So very briefly, as you heard in the introduction, I have a technical background. I studied computer science at NC State University. And like many people who have a technical background and have a taste for business, I also have a startup. What differentiates me is this concept of social entrepreneurship, which is still an emerging idea. And some people will hear a model that talks about social change or empowerment of communities, and they will see that as a very good political platform or an activist cause, or they will see it as a for-profit, a non-for-profit model. But then they will be confused at saying, okay, how are you going to make money at these ideas? My idea, my vision is a digitally inclusive society where people have the freedom to improve their lives through affordable access to information. However, my approach to that is self-funded. And while it is good to seek grants and while it is good to have existing support or find RFPs where people have already seen the value of investing in these ideas, I find that having an idea that can sustain itself from people in the community basically purchasing low-cost devices that also fund the operations and advance the mission is the best way to make sure that no grant or no program can externally close down the progress that I make on that vision. In this case, we look at two problems. An informative, in a lot of my R&D, it's working with scholars like yourselves in understanding issues of sustainability. So, for example, the issues of e-waste, where 70% of electronic waste heads to landfills, according to the EPA. And you also have the other issue of the digital divide and social mobility, which are interrelated, which is the idea that, or the fact that about 50% of homes that earn less than $30,000 a year, according to Pew's Center for Internet and American Life, lack ownership of a laptop or a desktop at home. There's similar levels of lack of connectivity to broadband because they lack a device that, like a laptop or desktop in the home. And because of that lack of connectivity and device ownership, there's also a very low level of digital literacy, that is to say, comfort with using technology as a means of solving life's problems, searching for a job, helping your student with homework, being able to achieve better understanding of deals when you're shopping, comparative shopping, even finding healthcare at home through virtual visits. All of those things are now denied you, and you are going to see greater and greater disparity in outcomes based on that metric. That's my theory. Coming to an academic audience, I would like to, first of all, flesh out that hypothesis really, see if it can be developed into a theory. Is digital inclusion, first of all, a supplemental social determinant of health? Is it a supplemental social determinant of educational achievement? Is it something that can predict and improve economic opportunity? And if that's the case, if we go back to that first issue of ecological sustainability, if we have millions and millions of devices each year that are devices that people lack, laptops, desktops, networking equipment, cabling, screens, phones that are being discarded, can we use that to fuel more opportunity? If we can, again, establish pilots that say that increased access to devices and other forms of technology can fuel change in those intransigent social issues. So with that in mind, one of the things that we have been able to advance with UNC Charlotte, going to our next point, is an idea of making device reuse a part of the sustainability protocols for the campus. So encouraging the reuse of devices the same way that we encourage the recycling of paper and plastics, by having receptacles in each building, by having posters and awareness campaigns and student social groups, so that people see sustainability of technology as a social issue, just as they see not littering as a somewhat of a social issue, as not polluting as almost an ethical issue. That doesn't happen, and with the support here, for example, of Dr. Mike Lizotte, who's the Director of Sustainability for the campus, they have evaluated the policy guidelines, which have not been looked at since the beginning of his tenure here at the university, about electronic waste, and realized there was nothing to address reuse of unused devices. Certainly electronic waste which is, for example, a broken microwave, that needs to be handled in a particular way. But that's essentially where we found in our initial exploratory research, that's where the policy discussion ended. Now, with the expanse of broadband internet, most devices that once would have been considered obsolete with a change in software, which we'll get into, actually achieve the same objectives that any user wants. They want to achieve access to the same internet, whether it's on a phone, a tablet, a laptop, or a desktop. And just 10 years ago, if you were reliant on offline software to be productive and running Windows software and a certain version of Windows software, Microsoft compatible software, then once your computer no longer could run that offline software, it was completely unusable. And that's why the discussion, as we found, was always centered on electronic waste. Because of standards, the standard of internet usage being opening a browser and then interacting with a cloud-based app, we can now safely assume that many devices are being discarded that are not actually broken. Not only can we make that assumption, one of the parts of the pilot project out of the in the outcome of that policy decision to explore reuse of electronics and within the greater UNC Charlotte neighborhoods and surrounding community was to see if we can essentially analyze what is already commissioned as electronic waste. So currently, if you were to go to your own campus facilities or sustainability directors and ask what happens to our electronic waste, currently you're going to get either a confused answer, perhaps it might be that the person doesn't know, or they simply know that IT takes away their old device when they get a new device. But even the facilities directors themselves will say we put everything in a large Gaylord container, which is essentially a large cardboard box that can hold about a half-ton of waste, and then a truck comes by on a weekly or monthly basis and takes it away to a recycling facility that won a contract among many other facilities contracts. And what happens to the devices or how many devices were reusable is a complete unknown. So just as we would measure carbon footprint if we're going to have a serious sustainability policy regarding the use of combustion engines versus electronic vehicles, one of the things that we offered, and with the consent of UNC Charlotte Sustainability Department, is the opportunity to send interns in the second summer and the beginning of the fall semester to itemize the makes and models of the devices that are being slated for being discarded through their conventional processes. And that way we can know, using our own data science models and techniques that we have developed and from our own research and development at Informative, we can get a series of reports on the weights and the measures and the dimensions of those devices. So for example, a laptop is going to have a smaller weight, a desktop is going to have a larger weight. So if we know we have the exact weights and measurements for every model that was found in this exploratory survey, then we can estimate about how many hundreds or thousands of pounds of technology is there. We can also use our own internal data sets to figure out whether those have the ability to be reused with our software. Our software is called Revive OS. It's based on Linux, which runs the data centers that run the most popular websites on Earth. Android devices run Linux, and of course Chromebooks run on Linux as well. And so there is a lot of unstructured data on the internet about what does and does not run these open operating systems effectively. And by comparing both of those data sets, what is in your current heap of electronic waste and what is the test result? What are the test results of what software what software can run well to refurbish those devices? We can get a rather accurate prediction, a fairly accurate prediction of how many of those devices could be diverted from the waste stream and should be instead slated for reuse. In the course of that discovery, we will then send additional interns, and when we talk about interns, we include high school interns from surrounding Title I schools with over 75% poverty or school lunch reported in their student bodies. And we use that opportunity as a low-risk means of teaching them how to do not only PC repair, but understand the issues at hand in their own families. Many of them, if not most of them, will answer in the affirmative when they say that their family is indeed behind the digital divide. It's not something they want to proclaim, but those devices they recognize as something that their family wished they had. And so when we have them go and try to apply our methodologies for testing, repairing, and installing Revive OS and related open operating systems on those devices, we incentivize them by saying that the first devices you build are for you and your family. So you have a bit of self-interest involved here. And also your family can see that though they have no technical environment at home that would explain this, you can actually repair devices, which boosts their morale. And I get calls anecdotally from parents regularly about the improvement that this had and the opportunities that their students saw themselves as having post-high school, or if they're in community college, helping them narrow which fields they would like to learn in community college, encouraging both men and women, minorities, as well as children from rural communities to explore STEM as a true career path. And that, of course, also has the basic objective of also refurbishing the devices in the end. So you have a reliably expandable workforce. Many of the programs that I use rely on WIOA funding, Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act funding, so that you can actually have piloted groups of pilots involving groups of students with, of course, their permission, that are also covered by workers' compensation, that are paid $8 to $10 an hour. It depends on the school. But that funding is a federal funding program that is bipartisan as well as respected as truly improving the outcomes of the employability, or rather outcomes of those students who participate in them. So you get the best of all possible worlds. You are involving people in sustainability who typically are excluded from sustainability, people from working class backgrounds. You're involving people in STEM who typically are not involved in STEM, women and minorities and people from rural communities. And you are also diverting a large number of devices from the waste stream. The final part of the pilot is something that we've done, as you saw, in many ways to the approbation of many sustainability groups that have awarded us prizes for our model, is to then divert those devices to the community-based organizations that are trusted by those same families that maybe not trust their own skills online, but they certainly do trust their congregation, their after-school provider, their daycare center, their YMCAs, and the like. And so because of that, we can go to, for example, the University YMCA and offer the skills of some of our UNC Charlotte interns, so students who are achieving more of an academic knowledge of social issues, to do a survey of the digital divide among their population and get an idea of how many families would be interested in a device at a certain price point, knowing that that price point would support through its proceeds the work of that community organization. So we can, for example, say it depends on a sliding scale from $50 to $150 for different kinds of devices. Would you be interested in purchasing a device? And of course, that's part of how we fund this operation internally. It's just, again, as a social entrepreneur, but it also contributes to the fundraising efforts of the host nonprofit. And we end up finding that there's a great deal of interest, and therefore that is a great deal of demand. One of the opportunities outside of the direct pilot to divert and distribute devices is to also have students interested in following up and seeing what was the impact of not only having the device, but making sure that the families who receive the devices are aware of existing free digital literacy classes. In this case, at Charlotte-Mecklenberg Library, the regional library, all 20 major branches have free classes on a weekly basis meant to teach digital literacy skills, meaning the skills not only to click a mouse, but to also look for a job, read and compare news sources rationally, being able to also comparison shop and do other things that have immediate impact on people's quality of life in a way that either is in plain English or in plain Spanish. And so instead of having a device in someone's hands where it may be underutilized or just used as an entertainment device, we have the ability to connect them to existing resources for empowerment and education. And that also allows us to track through student projects and class projects, track the attitudes that people have. How do they evolve? Do they feel an aversion to technology, and does that aversion change? Do they feel more comfortable searching online at home for a job instead of waiting in line to go to a public library computer and ask a librarian for help searching for a job? These are one of 2 or 3 of several higher level questions. And those, of course, are questions that lead into the next bullet point here, which is engaged scholarship. Engaged scholarship at UNC Charlotte, being in my home environment, I have my offices here on campus. I can see is truly enmeshed in how many of the both faculty, staff, professors, and even students approach their work. It can always improve and it can always grow. But what I have found is that there is a summit that happens annually, and I was also a panelist and presenter there. And there are many professionals from many disciplines who are interested in ways of improving the quality of life and measuring the quality of life and improving it as well if possible here in the surrounding communities. We are ranked at the bottom of the Harvard Chetty study from about the last 4 or so years in terms of social mobility. I think we are of the top 50 cities for each state, we're either 49th or 50th. It hopefully has changed, but Baltimore and Charlotte bottomed that list out, meaning that if you were born in poverty in 1980, at the time of the study, you were the most likely, not guaranteed of course, but most likely to still be in poverty roughly 30 years later. That intransigence is in the east and western parts of the city, and in light of the political unrest that has been of course observed by all citizens, but because of the shootings that have happened in the last couple of years in both Baltimore and Charlotte, there is not only a academic or a personal or a phenomenological interest in these issues of social mobility and engagement in the community, but of course you have a lot of students who are coming to school and they're wanting to do something more than simply publish another paper. They would like to be able to do something to use their talents and their skills for a change. So we have, now speaking in terms of my startup, Informative Technologies, have embraced this fully, and we have opened our doors for internships and opportunities to coordinate with as many campuses as we can to further that research and to use our professional connections with a lot of nonprofits, which tend to be our clientele. For example, the YMC branches and the YWCA branches and others in the area, to allow them to be the environments where students can study the impacts of this technological change as we continue to issue hundreds of devices out into the community. One last piece before I shift gears is how we also pilot new kinds of programs that take our core training methodology. It's a methodology of training people who have no technology at home, who have no personal hobby in technology and perhaps not even an interest in entering into the IT field, training them to become what we call mission-driven technicians who understand the issues around the digital divide and digital inclusion and the importance of sustainability as what motivates them to want to learn how to rebuild devices using our techniques and our software. That methodology is now being wrapped into something that we call the Hack and Hustle Academy. If you don't mind, just a few more moments, I'd like to show you just what we did yesterday, and it's actually going on now. And we are, for this week and next week, we are working with an initiative called the Hip Hop Academy, which is a nonprofit here in Charlotte, North Carolina, that uses hip hop culture as a cultural framework and milieu and an analog, for lack of a better term, to explain technological concepts. I'll give you an example very briefly. Open source software, where you have a peer review process with multiple contributors in a commons-based setting, making software around the world, like, for example, Linux or Android. Those are all actually not owned by any one company, even though there might be trademarks like Chrome or Android or Google. There will be trademarks that are owned proprietarily. The software and the applications themselves are contributively built. How do you explain that to someone who's completely non-technical, where they get it within an instant? Well, people understand remixing music. You can take R&B and soul, and you take a sample of it, you use a turntable, you use recording software, a digital audio workstation, and you take and splice and stitch together something that is creative. And people like it, and then they build on that, and then they remix it, and they respin it. And that is, of course, one very easy example of how a culturally relevant approach, if we were to be more academic about it, would be missing in how technology is often taught. If we talk about being a geek or even being a hacker, it may mean nothing if you've never heard of anything constructive about those terms. Those are insult words. But if you hear about remixing, that might make more sense. So that's part of our approach. In this academy, this collaboration says, not only can we take the mission-driven technician training that Informative does and wrap it in hip-hop, not just terminology, but analogs, really. It's still they're learning the technical knowledge, but then encourage the hustle part. Hustling is, of course, like to many people, hacking. To outsiders, it's a negative word, and you don't want to be one of them, and you want to avoid them, just like you want to avoid hackers. You want to avoid a hustler. But within, for example, many urban communities and hip-hop culture, hustling is you working really hard to make ends meet and support your family. And oftentimes, the only products that you have that are low cost are illicitly obtained. For example, a stolen laptop, for example, that's the only way you could get a wholesale laptop, would be to steal it. Obviously not to justify the behavior, but that's often the justification. I am trying to do something legitimate, I'm trying to support myself and my family, but I have to do anything necessary to obtain product. So if we remember that we have a model that now is culturally relevant to explain this, we introduced the word the phrase circular economy. You don't have to take a product that has value and take it from someone else and then sell it, and now it's a detriment to your neighborhood or to your economy. You can take something that has $0 in value, which is electronic waste or something that is being diverted from a waste stream, and you can participate in a program that you share in creating value, and you share in the value that you've created. So not only would a device be procured that came out of a waste stream, you have the skills to convert that into a fully usable Chromebook-like device that can run Windows, Linux, and Chrome apps using our software. You know how to serve and support your community and your clientele, and when you are serving your community, you're also helping the nonprofits who are essentially your retail outlets if you were thinking in pure business terms. So you are there to support the YMCA and any technical questions that have to do with the devices you made. Now, instead of taking only a negative attitude towards the idea of even hustling, that is now converted into a skill set of being able to sell products and serve them, and show that that is a way for you to help your family and help families like yours in your community. And that is, of course, a mentorship thing, because it's more of a mentality. So that's why we, as you see, have meditation, mindfulness training, and then hip-hop life lessons, where they look at vignettes of various artists and look at the ways that they transcended the limitations of their upbringing and also used entrepreneurial and business and networking skills to move themselves up socially and mobily, in a socially mobile fashion. So just ticking through some of the things that we used in the class. Here's an example quickly of what I was saying. On the right, you see the technical approach, hardware recycling on the number one, and introducing to coding, which is what they're doing currently. Entrepreneurship skills, which will be next week. And each morning we begin with calming one's mind and focusing through meditation exercises to kind of think about the bigger picture of what's going on in your life, your family, and your community, to motivate you to understand why you're in this mentorship program. What they have done at the Hip Hop University is to also point out how these are concepts that are values that are prized in hip hop culture, turning nothing into something, which is oftentimes a lyric that's used. And it's often used in terms of very illicit things, but it can also be used in terms of having ingenuity, making a way out of no way, and through the art of language, and that's also connected to programming. Coding is a form of language. It's a computer programming language, but here you can tell a computer to do anything you want. Again, that's encouraging creativity through language, but it's not only in art, but it's also in technology. And again, as we mentioned, hustling and getting your mind right as a virtue, just applied in a way that is conducive to social empowerment as opposed to self-interest, self-gain. Wanted to look at one of the opportunities before I turn it over for a little question and answer and interaction and about ideas that come from the community of listeners right now, is the essence of what we're trying to do here is to say, I stand ready personally to work with you to move ideas like this into the mainstream, one campus at a time. We can find partnerships like Hip Hop University in any city. We can find, of course, grant funding, I'm sure, for things that promote workforce development and social mobility quite easily. At least that's in the funding opportunity. Sometimes it's quite hard to find something that's new, that hasn't been tried before, or it may not be as relevant in 2017 or 2018 as before. We think that we have a model that can be borne out as making real indents in those issues. We also would encourage working with you collaboratively and keeping you abreast of what we're doing here at UNC Charlotte in terms of our sustainability policy, and see if we can draft model language that can be introduced into the sustainability policies of other universities and colleges, which is essentially to say that faculty, staff, and students will be encouraged. We can't make them move their personal devices into any receptacle, but we can certainly address questions and concerns about security, data erasure, and the ability to know what happened to the devices once they were given, so that we no longer have this black hole that occurs when something is slated as e-waste. Those issues may vary slightly from campus to campus, but by having a sort of a clearinghouse, that would be a service I would be happy to provide to the academic community of how did you achieve this and what strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats are there going forward to strengthen our policies. And then again, as we mentioned, there is a security concern. There are devices that could be stolen that were slated for reuse. And of course, people's information is of paramount importance. Protecting that information from being discovered is why before we do any reuse, we teach students to isolate the devices. We actually do have a secured manufacturing style facility as well to wipe all devices according to Department of Homeland Security and National Institutes for Science and Technology, NIST standards, so that there is essentially no possible way of retrieving the data that was originally put on the device by the former owner. Then we overwrite the device. So we have solutions to those questions, but we know that we should address as many hard questions as possible, as we know that people will find a reason to not be motivated to give a device unless they have full assurances that there's only benefit. And one last piece of that is, again, tracking the impact. If we have the makes and models and serial numbers of devices tracked from each campus, and how they're diverted and how much poundage was diverted from landfills or from other waste streams that would be inappropriate for a working device. Well, how many of those devices went to YMCAs or to community schools or went to families in need? And let's bring that back as a story that can be shared on social media as a impact narrative, a data narrative, essentially. Let's take that data and let's encourage engaged scholarship on that, and let's brainstorm ideas of engaged scholarship opportunities. So again, I stand here happy to serve, and at this point, I believe it'd be good to open it up for commentary. I'm just looking to Dr. Peterson at this point.
Oh, that's great. So we're happy to take questions right now. If you have, you can see on the chat function that you can use that to ask questions if you have any, and just, let us know what you'd like to know or what kind of experiences you've had with similar kinds of systems. Let me see where we are. We have just a couple people, but we'll see if any of them have questions.
Okay.
I've got one to start, actually, if you want to go ahead. One of the things that I have experience with is after-school programs, and it can be really hard to motivate the students to do things that they may not have an interest in. And I'm wondering if you target students who initially have an interest in this, or if there are ways that you engage them in this that show them that they have an interest. There's a balance there. Does that make sense?
Yes. One of the ways outside of Hip Hop University, which is certainly a way to bring in something that they are interested in, maybe the music they listen to, for example, as a way to make it easier to swallow all of the jargon, is what I do on the first hour is I'm going to show you and tell them what they will achieve in the next hour. Something that sounds unthinkable. You're going to take apart this laptop down to its screws, and you're going to put it together. You'll understand it, and it's almost like prove it. Now, most of the students, they're in a group setting, so they see their peers step up. There's that hesitation of, okay, who's going to volunteer? Someone steps up. Almost no one has ever done this before, so they know that they're all similarly intrigued with what will happen with each unboxing and unscrewing of some part or component. And as we talk through what it means in plain language, they realize, yeah, a brain has short-term, long-term memory. It has to have energy, okay, electricity, RAM, storage. And then at the end of that hour, they've taken it apart and put it together probably 2 or 3 times as a group. And now I hand the device to the person and say, great, this is your laptop. And that now gets everyone really stoked and excited. And I've done this with thousands of hours of internships with lots of students, some that have special needs, and the hands-on component is a great equalizer. And also keeping jargon out, so I let them know I want to use plain language, and in fact I encourage students, if they, for example, tend to be, the non-English language tends to be Spanish, well, what is that word? What would you describe that as? So that they can now see, hey, I want them to bring whatever their culture is, their heritage is welcome here. And I don't want to just spread more jargon. I want you, what's an easy, plain Spanish word for that? And now that sinks in maybe a little more because that might be their heart language. So that's a way to make it really fun and engaging. And from there, we're going to make apps on this. We're going to make a game on this. We're going to set up a website. We're going to do something new. And now you're going to do this for your community. So.
Great. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Are there other questions? I see a comment from Tylese Cooper saying that good job, such a terrific program. So she's definitely interested coming from Baltimore there.
Definitely.
Are there other questions?
Okay. Do we have a place, location, organization that might come from?
So I don't have any information on where she's coming from aside from her email address, but I will share your information and their information and send everyone an email with a link to the archive video so that those who weren't able to attend can also see what we've been working on today. So
absolutely.
Great. Well, if there are no other, it sounds like Tylese says that University of Baltimore is definitely interested in partnering.
Excellent.
So I think if there's anything, Tylese, that you'd like to know or any kind of next steps that you'd like to get information on, if we want to set that up now or if we want to do it via email, either way would be fine.
Sure. And that reminds me of talking to Ms. Cooper. She pointed out a lot of the social policy questions, social aspects of things, or maybe even sociological aspects of the issue of digital inclusion that she sees in her classroom, where we have a strong sustainability focus, perhaps here in UNC Charlotte, in terms of the policies about what is diverted from landfills, what's diverted even from a recycling plant, and what's reused. In University of Baltimore, she suggested we should be asking whether students have the devices that are needed to complete their coursework, just as we would ask if they have learning needs, if they have food security needs. We hence the idea of free lunch programs. If access to technology is now an essential prerequisite for success, and we're going to use a lot of technology in the classroom and a lot of work that's collaborative, that's done outside of the class, she's seen from, in her own experience where students say, I'm sorry, I cannot continue your class, I don't have a device, and multiple times. So let's go beyond that kind of subjective anecdote, and let's actually see how many other instructors in our campus have seen that. Should we adjust our policies?
That's a really good question. I did see that Deborah has a background working with bicycle recycling, and so it seems like she's very interested in a similar kind of model, but for a different kind of technology in a way.
Yes.
So it might be really interesting to have a conversation offline
yes.
or at another time with her. So it seems like there's some really good
yes.
connections there.
Excellent.
Great. Well, we don't have any other questions right now. If anyone does want to ask any, now's your last chance. But I do want to thank James for offering to do this with us.
Honor.
I think it's been really helpful to get a sense of what he's working on and to really share the kinds of projects that he's been doing. And again, I do want to thank Natasha and Christina and Ashley for their help with our technical aspects with the WebEx. I hope that it was smooth for all of you as well. So thank you all so much,
yes.
and I'll send around emails and the link to the archive video so we can keep this conversation going.
Yes.
Great. Thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you, everyone.